if you're purchasing something with violations on it, first I would definitely get an attorney. I would look and see if there's any permits that have been recently closed out. A little perspective on how big of a problem this is. There's 6 to 8 months out for hearings on these things now. Don't be afraid of violations. There's definitely an opportunity there, and you can end up with something that's completely doable. Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm your guest, Zack Limbaugh, and with me always is your hosts, Tom and Mark.
Wow. First take?
Wow.
Keeping it.
And he used Zachary too. He even went above and beyond to be so professional.
Yeah.
Wow.
He did almost look at you at Tom, though. He was a little confused at that part.
You're right above me reading. All right.
All right, we can jump in here. So, great episode today. I guess before we jump into this, though, listeners, we don't charge anything. We need more reviews out of you. The one ask we have, it helps us get more guests. It helps us get more exposure. So please just take the 10 seconds. That's our one little request from you. We don't really ask for much.
Spotify or iTunes, you can just click it from your phone, and it really helps us. And if you want to say something nice about us, it makes us feel better when we're not feeling good.
It helps us on our down days.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
When I'm driving up to Roselle, it just makes me feel a lot better. So, all right, man, we're talking about a lot of topics here. We get a lot of questions on this, actually.
Well, we talked about today so many different aspects of the investor journey that some have experienced and screwed up, some have not experienced yet. So I think there's a lot that if some of this doesn't apply to today, this is evergreen type content.
Well, this is also content that's not found anywhere else, right? You can go to a lot of places to learn how to read NOI or like how to evaluate buildings, but like how to deal with the city of Chicago and like violations. Like there's not a book on that. There's not Bigger Pockets ain't going to tell you what to do here.
If there's a book, it change every week. Like that's the problem is a lot of what we talk about today is really maneuvering within a system that is just here nor there at times. So
yeah. So, all right. So before we jump in, what's our housing provider tip of the week?
Well, housing provider tip of the week is, I should say, I always get permits, but we talked about that enough on the show. But for screening, I had a call with a fair housing person today out of DuPage County. One, because they're trying to accuse us of something, but no matter what, I took it as an opportunity to talk to them about kind of where screening's going and where, with the crunch of housing or limited housing out there, that's not going away. And these fair housing issues are going to come up more and more. So first and foremost, whether you have 1 unit or you have 100 units, you need to have some sort of written criteria out there. And that written criteria, you need to follow. So don't write it just for the hell of it and then just make exceptions. Write something that you can stick with and you can point to if you have a website or you can put it in your application. So make sure you're covering your butt there to keep yourself from the fair housing. The cool thing about that is there's enough people that don't do it that as long as you have something in place, you'll at least be able to fly under the radar, and as long as you follow it as well too. So
yeah, and go just I think you have it on the GC site, or if you even just Google, like just go. These are the things you need to take into account.
Yes.
Like you have so many people out there, you'll see a listing, and it'll be like no Section 8 allowed. It's like Jesus, like this guy's just asking.
Yeah,
for,
no criminal record. Like
just asking for trouble. Like the attorney's gonna see and go, oh, here we go.
Yeah, and then 780 credit score only. It's like, oh man, like it's bad. That people do, and the funny thing is, a lot of people have their criteria in their head. And so just putting it on paper and making it a formal document and making it where the public can see it is huge.
All right, it's good stuff. Let's bring our guest in.
All right, man. Today's guest, he, another attorney, and this attorney today is awesome. He's got some crazy stories. We're going to share some of our crazy stories. Without further ado, want to introduce Zack Limbaugh.
Thank you, guys. Good to be here.
I am excited to have you on here. I originally invited you and then we lost contact, but man, like you are like the ideal guest for the show, and I'm excited to have you on here.
That's a lot of pressure. I don't know if we should start right there.
Yeah.
Well, special shout out to Gary Davison, who episode 79, he introduced us at the Finance of America event, so I'm super grateful.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Like your podcast, like listening to what you guys have to say and your guests, so I'm excited to be here.
Man, I hope you brought some stories because you've probably seen some stupid shit. I've
I've definitely got some interesting stories for sure. all kinds of things that you see when you're dealing with the city of Chicago, and some nightmares that people have gotten themselves into for sure.
Well, talk to me. You have a pretty niche business. Like, how'd you get to it?
So I actually worked for the city of Chicago when I was in law school.
Oh, so you saw stupid shit there too.
Yeah. And I immediately was like, this is not the side that I want to be on. So I started out on my own. The day I got my law license, I quit the city, and I used to park in front of 400 West Superior with signs on the side of my car with my phone number on them and waiting for people to call. And then it just kind of grew from there. I started with a lot of vehicle impound stuff. I used to do, that's what I was prosecuting for the city, was basically drug and suspended license vehicle impounds. Most of the time, though, I'd be going after the owner of the car was who we'd go after. So a lot of times it would be a grandma that you'd be taking her car because her grandson's friend had grandma marijuana in the back seat. So I definitely didn't want to do that for the rest of my legal career, and thought it'd be an opportunity to help people out. And so I had an interesting adversarial role against the city where I didn't like the policy, but these were all my former coworkers. So I've had a good relationship with the people that work at the city while still wanting to fight the policies and stuff.
How long were you working at the city for?
I worked there for 2.5 years.
What was it like? Like, I mean, we always see the front side of it. And
It was interesting. When I first got the email, a friend of mine and I both got an email at the same time that we got a job from the city. Neither one of us had remembered ever applying for it. It was just a random email. I guess we had applied like 6 or 7 months before. We went into a building at City Hall right across the street. We went in, and neither one of us knew when we got this job. It just said you were hired. There was no interview or anything. We were selected from like a lottery. And we got there, and neither one of us, they just had us signing all these papers, like all these HR papers, and neither one of us knew if the job was paid. We were afraid to ask if this thing was even paid. So it was pretty interesting. And then we were asking at HR where we were going to be or what we were going to be doing, and nobody knew. They were like, well, no, we just have to get you into the system. And then they're like, bring a book and come down here. And you had to sit there until you were assigned somewhere. So we spent like the first week, like not even knowing, one, if I'm getting paid for this thing, who I'm working for, what I'm supposed to be doing. I spent my first week of working for the city reading a book, sitting on a chair. And then I eventually ended up at 400 Superior, which I was mind blown at what was going on over there. It was just a really interesting system. There was not a lot of lawyers on the defense side, mostly just individuals coming in. And I did all police issued tickets. So it was us dealing directly with the public, CTA violations, smoking on the CTA, public urination. So a wide variety of people that you got coming in there. But not a lot of oversight as far as we kind of got to learn on the job. We weren't being trained, specifically on stuff. It was kind of learn as you go, which was a great experience. And especially being in law school, kind of figuring things out as we went.
Who was judges? What was it like working with them? Like, are they friendly to you?
How old are you at this point? You're
right
20?
now, at that point, I am 22, maybe. Yeah, 22 years old.
Are you from the area? Are you from Chicago?
No, I'm actually from Michigan. I'm from suburbs of Detroit.
Oh, okay.
So that was I didn't know anything about the city of Chicago either. This was all new to me. I'd only moved here for like 2 years. So the idea of that big of a city and all the stuff that they were doing, I used to dismiss tuck pointing tickets because I thought it was a made up word. I was like, the hell is this?
That's my type of lawyer.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know, whoever heard of this before, So eventually I figured that out. But
Someone very mad at you right now.
yeah, right. Yeah, I'm glad I don't still work there. I would not have a job. But yeah, so it was an all new learning experience for me. And
Judges, what was
they
it?
were good. They were. They're pushing things through. I mean, obviously they were working for the city, but neutral. So that actually helped me when I got out on my own because I had a good relationship with all of them. They'd been listening to me when I worked for the city, so now they couldn't ignore me when I was on the other side. So that's, I do have a lot of respect for them because they did listen to whatever was in front of them. So it was always good.
Yep. All right. So you go out on your own. you're basically sitting there just, and we've heard this from Mr. Porch and from others, just like finding the people at the job saying, hey, you need this, right? Like you're there in front of the court steps and you know that they have a problem and you potentially have a solution for them.
Yeah, and at the beginning, I didn't really think I had always won on the city side, so I didn't think I was going to win any of these. I initially started off as, hey, I'm going to be a service to save people time, so they're not wasting 4 hours down here. That I'll charge very little money, and I'm going to go in there and just you can go back to work, and I'll sit here and take the time, going through these cases. But then I, developed systems I realized the city was skipping a lot of parts as far as notices and stuff like that. And I realized there actually is a defense to a lot of these things. So that's how it's kind of grown from there.
Okay. When did you start seeing, because right now you do a lot with like city violations, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the niche. When did you start seeing more of those? Like when did you go from, public urination to...
Yeah, so I kind of transitioned. I worked in-house for a guy that owned a couple of high-rises downtown, and I was basically his in-house attorney who handled everything. So that kind of expanded my practice areas into a lot more litigation and stuff. And then I always ended up going back to the city stuff. That was kind of... That's where I had all the relationships. All the people that I worked for or worked with when I was at the city have now spread out in all different departments. So I found that was where I was able to make the most difference is on the city stuff. And then in 2021, a mentor of mine passed away, and he was a well-respected building code attorney. He had worked for the Department of Buildings, Demetrius Care. He had been around for a long time. And he passed away. And so I ended up with his practice. And so I kind of shifted to just focus on more or less building code stuff. But I still do it all. But that's kind of my niche now is more or less building code violations.
Okay. Which is a great topic for our listeners.
Right.
Right now, I want to learn more about the business. How are you? I'm sure it's a lot referral, but are you still going down to court and scooping up people? I guess, how much do you still got to grind to get clients?
No, I mean, it's mostly, I have a client base that, property management companies and multiple building owners that keep me busy, but I still can't help every time I'm going down to court. There's always somebody there that's like, hey, you're the guy in a suit walking down the courtroom at 400 Superior. They're like, hey, can I ask you a question? So you still pick up stuff. And a lot of it is word of mouth referrals. I get them from all over the place, but I have a pretty solid book of regular clients that these things, anybody who owns multiple properties, they get city stuff, whether it be water bills, building code violations, whatever.
Cool. All right. So we want to jump into, for our listeners, like how to handle violations, because a lot of them haven't navigated that. Yeah. Before doing that, though, give us a crazy horror story. Give us one. Give us a silly one.
Yeah. So I had a really interesting one on Michigan Avenue. My client had gotten a notice from the water department that they were going to terminate water service to this large multi-use building, commercial, residential, that they were going to terminate our water service immediately because they had claimed that they had scoped our storm sewer from the city main and that it was broken and it was causing a Michigan Avenue to collapse in the middle. Had nothing to do with the actual water usage, so there was no reason to shut the water off. So we had to go in and get an emergency injunction to stop the city from shutting off our water. And where it got interesting is when we actually went and dug up the street, we found out the city had replaced the sewer main underneath Michigan, and they had actually cut all the lines from the storm sewers that were feeding into it and never tied it back in. So everything that said about scoping it out, obviously there was no entry to our building. So it was actually the city that had cut all these lines and then just left them. They were washing sewer water or storm sewer water out under the road and causing a sinkhole in the middle of the street.
So were they just trying to cover their butts and going after everyone on that block? I don't
had
understand
no
the
idea.
intent.
I mean, I think they knew that the street was collapsing. They had figured that it was water washing underneath it. But I think they had no idea it was a contractor from the city that probably had not told them that they had replaced this section of storm drain. So it was extremely expensive. It would have been catastrophic had they shut the water off. We would have lost. We had restaurants. We had all types of businesses and residents that wouldn't have water. We would have broken all those leases, obviously. Chicago Landlord-Tenant Act isn't friendly to landlords that don't provide water service. So it could have been catastrophic, and here's a situation where nobody knew what was going on.
Well, think about that conversation. All right, this is what the letter's going to say. We're going to say that we scoped it out, and we'll threaten to turn off the water, and just have them open up the street. Like, think about that conversation, like leading up to like them sending it.
Yeah, just like it's almost. I'm being pretty cynical here, but it's almost like very strategic,
Yeah.
right? Like let's just come in with the highest threat ever, and like they're going to say, "Screw it, it's better for me to open this up."
Yeah.
No, and it was we were lucky that we were able to get an injunction on them and get a court order to stop them from shutting the water service off while we could sort this out. But that's a situation where a lot of times the city doesn't know what other departments are doing. So you have one trying to enforce something that another department has done without anybody knowing, right?
Oh yeah, all the time. I got a much smaller scale story, but funny. We have a deck on top of a coach house, and you could still, the main electric, a tall person can still grab it, right?
Okay.
So they wanted some sort of lattice or some sort of barrier. So we, first electric inspection, we failed because of that. We built said lattice, and we failed new construction for being over height. I was like, well, your buddy told me to.
Yeah.
So, and those are inspector, like those are the same department,
Right.
Like electric and new, under the same umbrella at least. Like that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think when the city is so big that every department or every individual is going to have their own concerns to do their job, but a lot of times there's no cohesiveness between the two, where one's telling you to do one thing and the other one's telling you to do something else. So
there's really no incentive either, right? If you're if you're the individual, you have no incentive to go out of your way. In a private company, it's a much different atmosphere, a much different culture. You might be tied to some sort of bonus, but that individual has no incentive to go that extra mile to over communicate.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I think that I'm able to do for my clients is I have relationships, or I've been given the runaround enough from the city where I know what shortcut who to go to, and I know who's in charge of what thing. Because that's the biggest problem that my clients come to me with is, hey, we've called 20 times. We've been trying to get a hold of somebody to get an answer on this. We just don't know who to talk to. And a lot of times the response is, well, different department, not us. So that's one of the frustrations of dealing with the city. I think.
Yep. All right, so let's talk about buying a building with violations on it. So
Sure.
you're going to go buy a building. First off, how would our listeners know they have some 3-unit they're going to buy in whatever community? How would they know there's violations? And if they see violations, what are some of the steps that they should be taking on the get-go?
So definitely the City of Chicago website is the place to go. And I think anytime you're looking at buying a property, you need to go on the building department website, look for violations, and look for permits that they've pulled.
Which is all on the same page.
Yeah, and it's all on there. And it's not that tricky to read. It shows you. You got to look at the dates of the violations for sure. See how old these things are, and then you can have your own inspector go through and check this out, see if these things have been corrected or not. A lot of times, one of the problems is they don't close out the violations after the fact. So there may be things that are open on there that have actually been corrected but are still showing open. So
that's just an admin issue on the city side, right?
Well, and if they haven't had somebody actually come out and inspect it, so a lot of times people will fix these things, and if there's no court action that requires an inspection, a lot of people are not going to call a building inspector into your place, right? That seems to be something we all want.
Yeah, that owner has no incentive, again, to do that.
Yeah,
right?
for
So
sure.
he does the work and calls it a day.
Yeah. And so that's the court action is really what forces people to get the inspector back out there, but nobody wants a building inspector in their house for no reason.
Is it true if somebody calls 311, somebody from the building department has to go out there?
Supposedly, yes. They do come out. Sometimes they'll check just the outside. If they don't gain entry, they don't gain entry. So a lot of times, and it depends on the area that you're in, but some tenants will use 311 as a de facto property management company, that they're going to complain to 311 first before they're going to call their property manager. So I tell all of my property management company clients, make sure that you have an open communication with your tenants, that they know to call you first, because you don't want to be dealing with the issue and the city. You just want to deal with the issue and get it fixed.
I'll expand that to the neighbors.
Yeah.
right? Like people on both sides of you, like, hey, this is my number. You call me before you call anyone else, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then you take care of the issue. You do that once, they know, okay, I know I can text this guy and the trash blows over, whatever it is, like he'll take care of it.
Yeah, I've had people like think they're cheating the system by having wrong numbers. Like you got the billing sign that you're required to have, and you're supposed to have the number on there, but they're like, yeah, it just goes to some voicemail. I never check it. It's like, but that's the people that are going to call 311 on you. Like,
yeah, and that's a very important point. People think like, oh yeah, I'm not going to get any. I don't want harassing phone calls from the neighbor. You do. You'd rather have them come to you than go to the city, because having them involved, is only going to complicate things for you.
Because if they do go out there and they don't get in, they'll still find shit on the outside.
Yeah, and they'll do the.
And that's the expensive stuff. The tuck pointing.
Yeah, the tuck pointing. Yeah, any of the masonry work for sure.
The torch.
And then you'll also get streets and sanitation that's its own situation. But the trash, like you mentioned, those are extremely expensive, and compliance is in the defense. Not like you can use with any of the building code stuff. If we get it in compliance, we're good. We don't have to worry about fines. But when you start talking about any type of trash or nuisance outside, building materials outside, those get very expensive, and you can't just clean it up. It's not a defense. So
I ran into the issue many times though, where it was the wrong address. It was the neighbor's address where I've had to go to court and defend that stuff. And the problem that you run into is the violation is so vague. You're like, you're not sure if it's garbage, debris, or what they're specifically saying. But I do know I have a vacant lot next door, and I want to make sure they don't think I own that. So you have to go to court sometimes for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something a lot of people will see those and just pay the fines.
Cost of doing business.
Yeah, and for the most part, I think it's usually always worth it to go down and fight it, because it's good to, once you review those photos, like you said, a lot of times it's not clear. Sometimes the photos that they have are not clear, or they'll amend it down to a lesser fine. So they're worth fighting, especially if you get a lot of them. I try and go in with big groups of them at one time so that I'm not costing my clients individual appearance fees for them. But there usually is an opportunity to save some money if you go in person and try and fight those versus just paying the fine.
What's the rule with going in person as far as it has changed over the last 10 years of if you're an LLC or if you can represent yourself, but if you're like for a management company for us, like we have to have an attorney. Like,
And real quick, are we talking street and sands? Or are we talking building?
So both of these would apply at 400 Superior. There was for a while, there was a Supreme Court ruling that you had to have an attorney if you were any LLC or property management company. Now that has been changed, that they are allowing a representative to go in. So property management companies can go in. If you're an LLC or not, you can still go in as a authorized representative of the business to go in and settle those fines and stuff. That being said, I always say get an attorney anyways, because there's a lot of times the way that we're successful on these is more of the technical requirements versus factual issues, that the notice wasn't proper, that they didn't write the actual violation. There was a technical flaw in it. And
what's the notice? You said it twice now. Like, what's the proper notice they're supposed to give you?
The initial thing, the initial notice of violation that you're going to get out. It's called administrative notice of ordinance violation. So under the municipal code, there's actually very specific requirements that need to be met on every administrative notice of ordinance violation, which initiates one of the city cases at 400 Superior. So technical flaws in that means the case gets dismissed. And so that's where a lawyer, just taking a glance at it, you can usually tell right away if it's missing one of the required things or if it has enough information on it. One of the things you mentioned earlier was the narrative section where you say you can't tell, it's vague. That can be a reason to get the entire thing dismissed, because the initial complaint has to specify certain things. And if it's not in there, or if it's vague and you can't tell what it's about, the judge probably can't either. So that can be a way to get those fines dismissed without them paying.
And I imagine mail or proper is part of proper notice as well too, right?
Yeah. So they're supposed to, first class mail is how they are supposed to serve you with these violations. But there's also timing requirements on how much notice they have to give you. If you're getting a notice of violation that says you got court tomorrow, that's not proper under the municipal code. So that can be grounds to probably just delay it, but sometimes get it thrown out.
I don't know if this is the right place, but I'll ask this here. There is so say you get that notice, or you miss court, say you screw up the days, you do have the ability to go back in, whether it be your attorney or yourself, to call it back, correct? Within a certain amount of days, 7 days or something like that?
You have 21 days from the date a default judgment is entered. So that's what happens when you miss court is they will enter a default fine against you, which
It's
is
just guilty or admitting guilt.
Yeah, and that's usually the maximum fine amount. So streets and sanitation, overgrown weeds, $1,200. So if you go get one of those, and this isn't also an important part I'll touch on later, but once you get one of those violations, you have 21 days to come in and have it vacated for good cause, which can be, hey, I missed the court date. After that 21 days, they consider it a final judgment, and it gets a lot more tricky to get it set aside. We basically have to attack their service of either the original violation or the default judgment, which can be done, but it's a lot trickier because you're not talking about what actually happened at that point. You're talking about whether they sent out the mail.
So the thing I want just for the listeners is if you do miss court or you had the wrong date, you do have time, 21 days, like you said, to get your attorney involved or go figure out what you got to do yourself. So, okay.
Yeah, and I would
that's
definitely...
big. Because I get a lot of people all the time like, man, I got work that day, screw it. I got a big meeting. I'll just pay the money or whatever. It's like, no, you could go do this.
Well, and the other thing to note is that when they initially send out a notice and it'll be maybe a $300 fine, that fine is only if it's paid within that 7 days.
That's
right?
a short timeline. That's usually you're
so
sending
if you miss that 7 days, you have to go into court in order to get a lower fine. Otherwise, they're going to hit you with the maximum, which can go from $300 to $1,200 or higher. The other important issue, I think, for your listeners, I see this all the time where people are no longer the owner of property, and so they get a notice and they're like, doesn't matter, not mine anymore. I'm not the owner. And so they don't do anything about it. They will enter a fine against you, and they'll still go against you whether you were the owner or not. So it's on you to go in to court and tell them that you're not the owner and provide documentation.
I've seen that
we
happen.
had that happen on debt clearance, like pulling a permit and debt clearance on
that's what I
something
said.
not owned. Yeah.
Yeah, and that happens all the time when people, they get a hold from revenue, and then they find out, man, we've got these things 4 or 5 years old, but we didn't own it at the time.
And
go
that,
back
and
and
that $80 fine has turned into whatever because it's been accumulating.
Yeah, and he's getting interest and collection fees on top of it. So,
Can you fight those?
yes,
Oh yeah,
for sure.
You show the actual HUD that you sold the property or whatever.
Yeah, and the longer you wait, the more difficult it becomes to fight those because you end up with, from the city's point of view, even if I can show that you weren't the owner of that property, if you've missed your 21-day deadline, they say, we can't do anything about it. It's not our problem anymore. So it becomes a little bit more tricky to open it up, but definitely there's channels that you can go through with the ownership department. It's kind of a different road that you have to go than a normal fighting a normal judgment, but something that you should definitely address sooner rather than later. You don't want to just ignore stuff when you get it from the city.
Yeah, we had an example at Drexel. There was a building that Jeff sold like 8-10 years ago, like a long time ago, showed up on debt clearance, hadn't showed up on other permits, showed up on this one, and he had actually turned it into condos and sold them off individually. So then we had to hunt down 42, however many HUDs to show like, yep, every single one of these was sold. Like we were not these are all sold in 2009. These fines are from 11 or whatever it was. Like, just like huge admin hassle.
Yeah, and it's and the longer that it is, it's harder to track down that stuff. People are like, well, I don't even remember at this point, or I don't have a copy of the deed on me.
And then people in the city don't want to have to make that decision either to do something.
Yeah, they're not going to do you any favors because they already have they have a judgment against somebody.
Yeah.
So and that's important to go back as far as selling properties when go down that ownership road to make sure that if you're selling like a vacant lot, that it's getting recorded. If you're selling like any type of property that you're just trying to get rid of, make sure that the other person records the deed. Because we see that all the time where, especially with vacant lots in the city, where somebody's gotten rid of these things, but the new owner never recorded it. And now it's got all these fines on it. And technically you are responsible. And now you're in the position where I can't resell the property. I've already sold it. and I have to basically regenerate a deed and try and get it recorded to, by whoever I sold it.
So let's walk through that real fast. So if I sell you a lot and you don't go record the deed, and then people continue to dump trash there and I continue to get tickets, that would fall on me as the seller still, because the sale has not technically.
Yeah, as far as the city's concerned, they're looking at the title. And so I'm never on title. You're the last name that's on record. So you're the record owner as far as they're concerned. So then you're trying to prove that a sale happened and you can come and bring in a deed, but the city's going to look at it and say, yeah, it's not recorded. That doesn't matter.
How do you ensure the city has your proper mailing address?
Make sure that if you're an LLC, make sure everything is updated with the Secretary of State, because that's what they're looking at. And that's one thing, you mentioned Gary Davidson and Castle Law. That's one thing that I've been working with them on, is trying to get corporate concierge type service where they're going to handle mailing and help with that. Because that's a constant problem that my clients have for sure, is that we're getting mail late, we're missing judgments, and then it becomes, we have something that we've missed the deadlines on, and we're trying to fight it after the fact.
Or it goes to the property. That's the thing that we have.
Yeah, and they'll send it to the property address. So make sure all the properties have the signs on them of who they're managed by, and that's clear on the front of it, and that you have good mailing addresses for everything. And update your records with the Secretary of State.
Yep. All right, so I want to circle back to the violation page, because I think a lot of times our investors go on there, and it's I want to do one or two paths here. So you go on there, path one, you see violations from 8 years ago. And it's the same, like you see them, then they see them like the next quarter, it's like repetitive. It looks like 50 violations. It's the same 5 over and over again. And then it looks like it was closed out. You don't really know. So I want to talk through that scenario. Then I also want to talk through when you are taking on violations and it's obvious, like, you see it at the building physically, and then you look and then, yep, 2 years ago and it's never been touched. There's no permit pulled, et cetera. Okay. So I guess let's walk through that first example where they might show a lot of stuff on that page, but nothing really looks open. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you see like closed and, conservative, blah, 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 closed. Like, how do you know, like, hey, am I in the clear here? Like, so, it might look like that, but how do you know?
I think the most telling thing is to look at the permit history. So I would look and see if there's any permits that have been recently closed out, or after the date of those violations, permits that have been closed out. So anytime you go and pull a permit, the building department's not going to issue you a permit unless your plans include correcting all open violations.
Correct.
Right? And they're not going to sign off and close out that permit unless you've corrected the old violation. So if you have a permit on there, especially if there's like a renovation permit or any type of new construction permit, then if that's been closed off and signed off on, then all of those violations, even though they might not individually be closed, are usually good.
Yep.
We see that a lot with new construction or renovations, where there could have been an old structure on there that had hundreds of violations that were never closed down because the thing was torn down.
Yeah.
And so as long as you have a new construction permit that was issued and closed out, then you're good. So those might apply to something that's no longer there, and those will never be closed off. You'll never get those off there.
Yep. All right, so now let's go through another Listener buys a 3-unit building. They love the building. Porch violations. They know they're going to spend $30,000 or whatever to take down the porch. Like, they're aware of that. Open violation. What's it like from a lender perspective? I know you're not the lender, but like sometimes you need the city to subordinate. Like, how do they get that deal done so they can purchase with violation? And then what are the steps for them to remediate that if they've never gone through the process?
So if you're purchasing something with violations on it, first I would definitely get an attorney because I think they can walk you through the steps of, the city is usually open to subordination agreements, which
what does that mean? Like, let's take a step back.
Subordination agreement, basically, whenever the city has a case pending, it'll show up on title to the property. So it'll come up as a lis pendens on the property. And what a subordination agreement does is it tells the bank or the lender, whoever your lender is, that their mortgage or their interest in the property is not going to be affected by that case. So it subordinates that case. It puts the case under the priority of their their lien or their mortgage that they're going to take on the property.
Yeah, so like I'm going to talk in real simple terms here. Like your mortgage wants to be in first position. In case
Correct.
anything goes wrong, they can have the property. They don't have that off the gate. The city's ahead of them. The city will agree, okay, we will subordinate under you. We'll be in second position, third, whatever it is, so that you can still get this lending done.
Correct. Yeah. And so that usually will keep most lenders at bay. That alleviates their concern of the Liz pendants on the title. And the city is usually agreeable to doing that because they want these properties fixed. And out of all the departments to deal with in the city, I do think the building department is probably one of the best because they want you putting your money into the property rather than collecting fines. We can comply out on all of these.
Yeah, every time I've bought some with violations, it's almost easier than my inspections.
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
It's like they want you to take care of it, and it's
Yeah,
very
and they're very happy when a new owner comes in because look, the previous owner, the person you're buying it from for whatever reason, whether lack of financing, just inability to take care of the project, is not correcting these violations. And the city wants these things cleaned up and done. So they are very helpful with getting inspectors out there. You can talk to the court inspectors and get them either out to the property before you purchase it, or they will give you the report from the last time they were out there and let you know, hey, these are the things that are cited, but we're really worried about X, Y, and Z. These are the things to take care of first. So that's why I would definitely get in touch with an attorney who has is able to get a hold of those inspectors and work through that process. And you can get a plan before you even close on the property, and get the permits in place. And the city will give you as much time as you need as long as you're moving forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point because a lot of times that violation will say masonry east wall.
Yeah.
Right. You have no idea. Like, am I just doing this section? It's like, is it 2 lentils or am I
70-foot
rebuilding
wall,
this?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you can get someone who can get you in touch with that actual inspector, now you know exactly, is this 5K or 50K? Right.
Yeah.
Like you kind of have a better feel for what's going on.
I mean, those inspectors have been in there, and usually at that point, these guys have gone around these properties maybe a dozen times. And so they know what areas are getting worse. Like that is an invaluable conversation to have from an investor standpoint to know what you're getting into. Talking with and those are the court inspectors, not necessarily the guy that initially wrote it up, but those are the court inspectors that have been following this throughout, the building code violation case.
Yeah. All right. So talk to us a little bit. That's all really good stuff. And if you've never bought some of the violations, like go back and listen to that because there's a lot of ways this can go wrong. It's not complex, but it's also not easy. All right, so let's talk a little about, you're starting to see more environmental complaints.
Yes. So that's something new that has just come up with probably in the last 6 months. The Department of Health has started to send inspectors out to building sites, and they are writing up a lot of violations for like construction screening that you're supposed to have anytime you're doing outdoor work, anytime you're doing sanding or grinding of any type. You're supposed to have a special permit from the health department, which a lot of people don't know about. They're going to the building department. They're like, great, we checked all the boxes. We've got all of our permits issued. And then health department shows up and writes you a huge ticket. They have been looking at tracking any mud outside of the construction sites, which very hard to prevent. Any type of like dust blowing or anything like that, they're writing violations. The problem with these, and the reason I've been telling and my clients, anybody who's pulling a permit, to make sure that everything is buttoned up from the health department standpoint and you're following all of the environmental regulations, is because these are not, you can't comply out on them. Okay, so these are not violations where we can come in after the fact and pull a permit for it. You can't pull permits after the fact. And the fines are high, and they're not negotiating them. So it could be $5,000 to $10,000 worth of fines on something as simple as, we tracked out some mud and the construction screening that we put up was torn.
And they can whack you for a few different infractions as well, too.
Yeah, and they're getting you for multiple things. And the big thing is that they're not negotiating any of them. So from a defense point, what we've been doing is fighting all of them. Now they're, just to give you a little perspective on how big of a problem this is, they're 6 to 8 months out for hearings on these things now. So when you go in and say, I want to go in front of the judge, they're telling you to come back in 6 to 8 months. So that's how
You
many.
might not even own the property anymore if you're flipping it.
Yeah.
Right?
And so, and that's the thing. Like if you want to be in and out of this quickly, that's something that can hang over the property, and they're
It's
going
on
after the
title maybe,
developers.
yeah.
So those are just something to be cognizant of, because I know it's new. It's something that we've just started seeing on my end, and seems to be a big issue.
Well, the bigger problem I hear there is if you're buying your 3-flat and you go hire a contractor and he doesn't follow those rules, you're the one that's going to get stuck holding.
Yes, absolutely. So I would talk that over with my contractor, because they do seem to be kind of, health department, isn't traditionally on these construction sites, I don't think. So they are writing them against whatever name's on the side of the truck, against the name that's on the front of the building. We've seen kind of all over the place with they're going after the property owner. They're just going after everybody. So just kind of be aware of what's going on at the property and make sure everything's buttoned up.
Man, them, the EPA, everyone's out to get you.
Everyone needs their piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a new one though, for sure.
All right, let's talk stop work orders.
Yeah.
Right. And we advise everyone just pull permits, be done with it. They have the new express permit process, which we've talked about on this show on multiple episodes. But you're the guy who didn't listen, and now you have the orange sticker up there.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what are the steps to get that right.
So the first thing that you want to do is go pull the permits, and you're gonna have to pay for the stop work order.
Which the
up,
fine has now changed on that, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it's gone up. So I think, and I always tell people just pull permits from the beginning. That is the easiest way to do this. And I think one of the issues for investors that if you're buying a property and you see that recent work has been done in there, go and check the city website again and make sure that permits were pulled for that. Because if you get caught after the fact, if you later do renovations and the inspectors come in and say, hey, that bathroom's not supposed to be here, you're talking about opening up walls, and it gets really expensive really quick. Aside from the fact that it's also difficult to get contractors to pull permits on work they didn't do, right? They want to get paid to actually do the work. They don't want to get paid to put their name on somebody else's work. So a good moving forward with permits initially is the best way to avoid all those. But if you do get a stop work order, go immediately, make sure your contractor goes and pulls a permit.
Yep.
Get drawings if you need to. And go through the process. It's going to be more expensive than had you done it right the first time, but don't try and just say, a lot of people will try and abandon the project at that point and be like, oh, okay, well, we're just not going to do it anymore. You're already in it at that point. Finish the work, do it correctly, pull the permit. Yeah,
we've had multiple clients over the last 10 years that show up in Chicago, buy a 3-flat, and it was rehabbed, and all of a sudden the city shows up and they have to then go back and get as-is permits or as-is permits with modifications. And that sucks. That's a long process too.
It is a long process. And it's very hard to find professionals that want to do it.
Yeah.
Because they don't get paid to.
You pay a premium just to have their name on there, and you might not even get much for it.
Yeah. And they absolutely, like, the contractors, most contractors that I've dealt with, they don't want to. That's the least desirable part of their job, is doing the paperwork and dealing with the city, and that's what you're paying them to do at that point.
Well,
they want
also the risk of, it's like you mentioned, it's someone else's work. If you're an electrician, the work was already done. Like, you really don't know what it. You don't want to be the guy there, like, at that inspection, right? Like, you have no idea what was done, and then you're going to be on the hook to fix it. You might have already quoted the owner something. Like, it's a bad spot.
You don't even know how to quote it. It's tough to
like
quote.
You're just that's just time
it ends
material,
up being,
right?
I'll give you'd be
This is my
for
hourly rate.
$2,500, and then it'll be time and material. Like, that's what it ends up being.
For sure. And if somebody's already cut the corner of not pulling a permit in the first place, probably not licensed, and who knows what other corners they've cut.
Yeah,
in it.
that
So,
Romex.
that can be very, very expensive and a huge pitfall.
What about porches? Like, how big? Like, that's. I mean, we're going on many years later from the original tragedy, and it was a really big thing, and then it's gone up and down as far as how much they're really citing that. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I see porches is still a majority of what I see coming through, especially with exterior stuff. And I think that's one, it's something they can see from the outside. They don't have to go in.
They see from the alley, even if you have a locked fence or whatever. So
yeah, so
they can get you.
And I think just the weather that we face in Chicago, porches are constantly deteriorating. So they're still very strong on enforcing porches. I've seen some metal porches now. Seems to be a new trend. I've had some clients going, and it's a little bit more expensive at the outset.
But they rot out, man. About 10 years ago, a lot of clients put them in. If you don't treat them right, they rot out, and you got to replace the sections.
Yeah. Real quick, one of the things that, and I'm not an expert on this, but when you're going, like, if you're creating like porch or a deck or whatever, and you're getting X amount of close to the lot line now, it's got to be Trex or metal. Like they're not allowing lumber if you're that close to the other to the lot line.
So
Same thing like on vinyl siding is almost not allowed anymore when you're pulling permits. Like you have to do hardy. So like it's for fire resistance. Like you're seeing a lot more steel or Trex or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think porches will continue to be a big issue for the city. You know, it's a life safety issue. And a lot of times on 3 flats, like that's the secondary means of egress. So you need it up there. And I think all of us who've been around Chicago long enough have been on one of those wobbly porches in the back that makes you, hold your breath for a second. So,
yeah. Anything else we haven't covered?
No, I think that goes through a lot of the basics. Maybe the difference between circuit court and administrative hearings.
Let's hear it.
A lot of times people will, first off, you'll get a notice of violation, then go to Superior, okay, and start off at 400 West Superior. People think, we can just pay the fine on these building code violations. It doesn't end there. If you don't comply out at 400 Superior, they'll usually get referred over to circuit court. Circuit court is
daily. So when we say circuit court, we're talking daily center.
The daily center. Yeah. So you end up over there. For most clients, I would prefer to be at circuit court at the daily center with these because you have an unlimited amount of time. Not unlimited. The city is going to make sure you're making progress. But a lot of these repairs, especially if you're dealing with multiple owners or going through a permit process, you just don't get the kind of time you need from administrative hearings to comply out. They're typically, when you get an administrative violation at 400 Superior, you go in, they'll give you 90 days usually to go get permits. If you come back and agree to pay a fine, then they'll give you another 90 days. But everybody who's dealt with an architect or trying to actually get drawings, you could be 90 days before you even get drawings submitted. So those, even if you're working towards compliance, they're just on a different time frame, and you're usually going to end up with a fine and may end up still going to circuit court after that if you can't get it done in time. So ideally, you end up at circuit court in the first place, where there the city is a lot more responsive to what's going on with the process. As long as you're showing improvement, they're going to give you more time to get it complied out.
Yep.
What are you seeing? What are the just don't do this? This is stupid client.
People trying to cut corners and do stuff without a permits is probably my biggest.
Or what's number 2? Because there's just too many people are accepting that. They're accepting that risk.
I would say probably ignoring stuff from the city.
Okay.
When you get a notice thinking, it's not mine anymore. It's not my problem. Well, if your name's on the top of it, it's your problem until you get it off. So that would probably be the other biggest pitfall that clients come to me with. And I've had people come to me with over $100,000 worth of city fines and be like, well, I sold those lots, but if you didn't tell anybody about it and it wasn't recorded, that was a problem to fix 8 years ago before we accumulated all this debt. So my hands kind of get tied quicker and quicker when you wait on stuff.
When does a property end up in demo court? And what is demo court, I guess?
So demolition court is when the city's determined that there's enough dangerous and hazardous conditions inside the property that it needs to be taken down, or it's not feasible to repair it. And so that is the courtroom, usually 11:11 or 11:09 of the Daily Center, where they'll actually ask for demo. And that's part of the process, is going through and determining that it's dangerous and that it's not feasible to fix it. That being said, a lot of these properties, I've had clients buy properties with a demo order on them, and they are feasible to fix it, but there's just nobody there to step up for whatever reason. So when it comes to a point, the city usually will move things to demo when they feel that it could be a risk for first responders going in. Somebody could go through a floor, and it's just not getting any better, and nobody's stepping up to repair it.
And that's our Red X buildings at that point.
Yes. Yeah. And so when a building is on the demo list, and if you are looking at one, it's important to, again, reach out to the city and find out exactly what's going on with it. It just might be something that you can fix, and this could be a good property, and you might get a really good deal on it. But that's something to reach out to the city. We can get them to put a hold on the demo. And if you come in with proper financing and a plan to renovate the building, get this up to code, and get rid of the dangerous and hazardous conditions, then we can actually get the demo order vacated, get the property out of demo court. You can get it completely complied out. So it's not done until it's torn down.
Yeah, I've provided proof of funds in court before.
Proper financing is cash.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it's not
I've
guaranteed
already
rate.
showed
It's
snapshots.
cash. Like that's how you get out of there.
And they definitely want to see with demo. They want to see that you're ready to move. That you've got a plan in place. We're going to pull permits. They're not going to agree to take something off the demo list until somebody's. You got to show them that you're in it to win it.
How many buildings are actually getting torn down a year? I don't see too many of them.
I have no idea.
It was bigger when the recession.
I know that I have properties that, or clients that have properties that have been on the demo list for 5, 6, 7 years, and haven't been torn down.
Well, I actually had. I just thought about this right now. We ignored a letter because it had we bought a property. It was right after the Olympics got announced. It's right there off Washington Park. And the letter had the previous guy's name on it. I'm like, maybe we got to deal with this. It was about all these garage violations being unsafe. And we didn't get to that property because we bought a whole bunch right before the Olympics and eventually got to it. And all of a sudden we had no garage. We ultimately had to come up. It wasn't until like a decade later, but we had to pay like $6,500. It was a brick garage. So like we actually thought we got a pretty good deal.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes the demo liens can be expensive though.
Yeah. I've had the opposite. Where it's like, man, that really cost 12.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I would rather do it myself than, leave it up to the mercy of whoever gets the order to do it.
You're just spinning a wheel at that point.
Yeah.
Guessing what it's going to be.
Well, we've had buildings burned down where it's so bad that they hire McDonough and 2 days later they don't even wait for us. They just go and do it. And then you got to pay for that. We've had to do that before.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the trouble with the demo list. And I also say, if somebody's like, oh, we just got this, it was just put on the demo list, we got time. We don't know that. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to. I mean, I'm sure it's driven by probably the alderman and whoever's complaining about it gets these things escalated, or if they think it's a hazard to.
But there's no clear
properties.
process on how it gets handled.
I don't know how it's done, anyways. I haven't been able to figure it out. So
hence the Northwest Ordinance.
Yeah, so that's it is important if you do acquire a property that has a demo order on it, to get in touch with the city immediately, or get in touch with an attorney to get in touch with the city immediately to try and get a hold put on that so that you can sort things out. Even before you get the demo order lifted, you can get a temporary hold put on it so that you don't come to the property tomorrow and it's gone.
Receivership. When does the city assign a receiver to a property?
So again, when the owner's not stepping up, and usually when there's something that's dangerous and hazardous, is a prereq to it. So receivers, they'll come in and correct the violations. A lot of times with porches, it'll be they're not going to fix everything, but they're going to remediate any of the dangerous and hazardous stuff so that it's not a risk to. They're usually buildings that are occupied by tenants and not single family home owner occupied buildings. But
cool. Anything else? It's good stuff.
Yeah, no, it's awesome.
We're in the underworld. This is where I like to live.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So, all right, let's wrap.
Cool. You ready?
Yeah.
You know the questions?
No. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I don't think you know the questions.
Yeah, I know the questions. All right. What's your competitive advantage? How have you been able to do so much while others wish they had your knowledge?
Just my relationships with the city and being around as long as I have with the individuals that work for the city, I'd say.
Yep. All right. What is one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
Don't be afraid of violations. I think there's definitely an opportunity there, and you can end up with something that's completely doable. And don't be afraid of a couple violations on a property, or even a lot of violations on a property, that could be a real opportunity.
What do you do for fun?
Hang out with my son. Yeah, family guy.
All right, what do you do though? What do you do with them? We gotta give us an activity.
Lots of sports. I'm a huge Detroit Lions fan. I know the Bears listeners won't like that, but lots of sports.
Tigers are doing all right here.
Yeah, Tigers.
Maybe by the time this airs, I don't know, but
yeah, we'll see. Very excited about the Tigers right now. We'll see.
Yep. All All right, give us a good book, podcast, or self-development activity you'd recommend to our listeners.
Right now, me and my son have been going through People's History of the United States, which is it's by Howard Zinn. It's a great book. He's in 5th grade, so they're learning U.S. history. And so going back through that book with him is very interesting. He's like, no way. They have some, it's the other side of history that they don't really teach in school. So I think that's a good read.
Nice.
Recommend.
Besides yourself, provide a quality resource to other Chicago real estate investors.
Castle Log, I would say. Gary and their team has a lot of knowledge. So been working with them on a lot of stuff.
He's a Packers fan. You're a Detroit fan.
Yeah, I know.
We're Bears fans. Like,
that's an issue.
We got the whole conference covered.
All right, awesome. Zach, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
You provide a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
You can check out my website. I'll give it to you guys and get in touch with me if they have any questions about stuff.
All right, we'll definitely add it to the show notes.
All right. We have a Chicago fact we end on. Who we playing for? Who's sponsoring?
Oh, we're playing for Diane Serrano, who bought a T-shirt at Straight Up Chicago Investor merch store. And today's sponsor is the Kaiser Group. Now, if you or me get this right, Diana gets a $25 gift card brought to you by Kaiser Group.
Okay.
Did I say 25? It's 50.
It's 50.
It's 50.
We're
All right.
skimping
We're
out.
almost-
Jeez.
there we go.
Tough times over here in the underground. All right, so we're doing basketball here. Maybe our guy's a Pistons fan. I don't know.
Oh, man. Provides the least.
So the United Center used to be Chicago Stadium. Chicago Stadium got torn down. In what year did United Center officially open? So what year they actually start having events at the United Center? And your options are 1989, 1991, 1994, 1997. 89, 91, 94, 97.
We could pick two different.
I'm going to go 91.
Yeah, I'll say 94 then.
94 is the answer.
All right, I would have said
there you go.
91.
All right,
All right.
nice.
All right.
Yeah. No
Congratulations.
Jordan.
I was only, were you ever at the old stadium?
Yes.
I was only there once
One
for
time,
like Disney
yeah.
on Ice.
I was
for a
little.
game.
It's a great show.
Originally cost $175 million to build. That sounds very cheap. I know it's $94. It's
Yeah.
probably like $400 million now, but still, that still seems relatively inexpensive. No,
Oh, that's really, look at the Bears. They're trying to.
cost me $1 million to
$5
do a
billion
5
is the
unit.
proposal for that. Yeah. And the one for the 78 at the Sox, I think that's $3 or $4 billion. Like they're proposing.
What did they put into Wrigley, too?
Yeah.
They put a
more
ton
of
into that.
just the
Yeah. They
outside
put
of
more of
Wrigley.
that into Wrigley. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Reinsdorf counting pennies.
Yeah. So, Zach, thanks for coming on. Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, if you have questions, message us on Instagram, Facebook, Straight Up Chicago Investor Club on Facebook, or go to straightupchicagoinvestor.com and go to the Ask Mark and Tom. We're always willing to help you out through whatever you're working on, and we're always willing to point you in the right direction with the resources that we have. So, Zach, thank you. Tom, thank you. Listeners, we'll see you next week.